Hello, shameless writers. Today we're talking about the 5 biggest mistakes that urban authors make when they're writing their first novel. Now, I want to begin the video with the caveat that not all literature with Black main characters or about Black American issues qualifies as urban. If you're like me and you are a white person raised in the suburbs, like, the 90s at any point, or maybe even the early 2000s, you were probably raised by guilty white adults who substituted the word urban for all things to do with Black people. They didn't want to say Black people. They didn't even want to say African American. They wanted to say urban for some reason, because there's no such thing as rural Black people or something. I'm not sure. But I wanted to specify that urban literature is its own very specific genre. The genre typically involves a lot of violence, swearing, and mostly the kind of street life. If you've ever admired a gangster or a thug who happened to be a Black American, chances are you enjoy the urban genre. Main characters can and will be killed off. You can expect a very nihilistic worldview. You can expect dirty cops. There's gun violence, there's drug deals, and there's more often than not killers for hire, presented as the good guys. So that's urban fiction, which is its own particular subset of Black and African American fiction. For instance, this is urban fiction. This is not. Any questions? Okay. As I always say before I start off these lists, a lot of newbie mistakes happen regardless of genre. This particular list might have some overlap with some of the other lists that I've made. However, some are very specific to the genre, and all of them are the ones that I've seen multiple times and really just rip you out of the story. Number one, starting off your first chapter with intricate details of possessions and people. Because of the specificities of the genre, material wealth is very important. No one wants to read about a gangster who's not doing well at his gangster profession. They want to know that he's a good gangster in that he has very nice cars, that he is accompanied by beautiful women, that he himself is physically attractive, because don't nobody like an ugly ass gangster. I know I don't. The problem becomes when you start off your very first paragraph detailing intricacies about the appearance of a person. For instance, you don't say they're tall and well muscled. You say they are 6'4", weigh 285 pounds, are cut up all to hell, have a black flat top with lines cut in it. You mention their exact eye color. You mention their exact skin tone and how many gold teeth they have. All in the first paragraph. It's even worse when it comes down to automobiles. Full disclosure, I'm not a car person. I don't care about brands. I know that a lot of people do, regardless of their favorite fiction genre, but you start listing like 0 to 60 speed and my eyes glaze over. Urban fiction is particularly bad about this, where you want to start off saying exactly, not that it's a Mercedes or a white Mercedes, you want to talk about the model, the year, how long you've had it, what the seats look like. For real, come on. All of these details don't necessarily need to be stricken from the book wholesale. Of course not. Particularly if you have like white leather seats. Wouldn't that be interesting to do, a couple of chapters later for the gunfight where his beautiful white leather seats were stained with blood? Fascinating. I love that. But don't tell me about his seat texture on the first page. It's especially bad when we're discussing women, and authors of both genders do this. I do not want to make this seem like this is something that male urban authors do more so than the women. No, no, they're both. Describing women down to the nitty-gritty of their bra size, and I've even seen describing the exact elasticity of certain anatomical parts. It's not needed. You can describe a woman as beautiful. You can even describe her features. But one, don't do it to that detail like ever, and definitely don't do it on the first page. The segment that I'm showing you right now, full disclosure, this is a female author, and I don't know what y'all do with your friends, but let me tell you something. I've never really meditated on the bra size of my friends. I think that's weird. And if I was that girl's friend, I would be like, hey, what's going on with you? Problem number two, all violence all the time. urban fiction is a violent genre. So this is not some pearl-clutching nonsense about, oh, must everything be about fights? Well, in urban fiction, it kind of does. Everything is conflict, specifically violent physical conflict, often involving firearms. But keep in mind that the violence needs to serve a purpose. Don't just have a bunch of, gunfights in there to show us how tough your protagonist is. Like, if we don't know that 30 pages in, you haven't really fleshed out the character very well. So all fiction, no matter how violent or gruesome, and this is for horror as well, you need to have a plot arc and you need to have a character arc, which means that every scene needs to matter, particularly with urban fiction, which is often much shorter than other genres, specifically sci-fi and fantasies. It's much shorter. If you see an urban fiction at about 40,000 words, that's not unusual and it's not weird and it's not even a novella. It's a book. So when you're working in that small of a space, you want to make sure that all of your scenes matter. Don't just have a fight just to do something. Oh, look, there's action. Action doesn't necessarily equate to interesting reading. The most boring movie scene I have ever seen in my whole life was that long boat chase in Face Off. There were a lot of explosions, there was a lot of shooting. I was bored. Why? Because it didn't really serve the movie, whereas the rest of the movie had been riveting. Thank you, Nicolas Cage, for everything you do. So when you're planning out your violent scenes, make sure you intersperse them with more quiet scenes, conversation scenes. These are the ones that make the violent scenes explosive and that they matter. Because if it's all shooting all the time, your reader just might find something else to read. Number 3, not giving your characters an inner life. Part of having a violent genre is that we as the reader need to care if our characters get hurt. This isn't just necessarily the main character, but also their friends, their loved ones, their mother that they bring groceries to every week. Even though they're a remorseless killer, they still take care of their mother. We need these small details so that we care about the person. We care if they're in danger. We care if somebody's coming after their business. We care if somebody's just encroaching on their neighborhood, thus drying up some of their income. Even if they're not in physical danger, we like this person. We want them to succeed. And if they don't have an inner life, if they don't have something going for them besides their street toughedness, it's really hard to get invested in them. So if you're writing about gangsters or dirty cops, yes, you should establish them as badasses, but also show them as people with phobias and insecurities. These are the things that make them lash out at people who don't deserve it, so you can simultaneously feel bad for the people that they're victimizing while also relating to why they're behaving this way in the first place, and maybe even seeing yourself in there. Number 4, and this is a touchy one, colorism. What I found when I became an editor was that a certain level of colorism tends to pervade all genres that are targeted to Black people. And it took me a while to kind of understand why. Because when you read about Caucasian characters in books, we generally don't talk about their skin tone. We might say that they're olive-skinned if they're Italian or Sicilian or Greek, but that's it. When we say somebody's a blonde, that's pretty much it. We don't talk about whether they have red or yellow undertones because why would we? However, when you read fiction that's targeted towards Black people, specifically Black Americans, they want you to know exactly the shade of Black the person is, whether they're more light-skinned or whether they're fully dark-skinned. That's not a problem. It actually helps me see the character better. And the exact shade of Black or brown that they are can help you see them, just like describing their hairstyle can. Unless, of course, your descriptions of your characters is creating a colorist hierarchy. Do all of your characters have a firm disgust for Black people who have a skin that's even a shade darker than their own? Are all of the female protagonists light-skinned while all of the unpleasant female antagonists dark-skinned with natural hair? If so, I hate to use this word, but it's a little bit problematic. And it's something that I've noticed specifically in older generations. And I'm not really sure why, I can guess, but if you want something more in depth about colorism, there are other places to go that are much more educated than anything that I, a simple editor of fiction, can offer you. What I can say is that while describing the skin tone of your characters, whether they are your protagonist or your antagonist, or really just random people that you see when you're out and about, I would recommend sticking to neutral color-based. So are they marshmallow colored if they're more light-skinned? Or are they cocoa colored if they're darker toned? I would highly suggest staying away from terms like red bone and high yellow, both of which I had to Google the first time I encountered them, because very often people see them at worst a slur, at best an antiquated borderline insult. The purpose of character descriptions is to allow your reader to see them. As long as your reader can roughly see the person that you see in your own head, then you've done your job as the author. There's really no need to do a deep dive in exactly what you think about specific skin tones. And finally, number 5, bad grammar. Now, I know what you might be thinking. You're thinking, excuse me, Kristen, this is urban fiction. No one is walking around speaking Shakespeare. If I start putting perfect grammar all over my book, it's not going to sound real and authentic. And you'd be right. Improper language and heavy slang is to be expected, specifically in the dialogue. However, if you have basically a wall of text, no paragraph indentations, no new paragraph for a new speaker, and narration, not dialogue, that is so heavy with slang and misspellings that the reader can't understand what you're trying to say, you are failing as an author. You cannot create realistic imagery, realistic characters, and the sense that the reader is in that place and time if they can't understand what you're trying to communicate. Understanding that improper English is acceptable in the genre is not the same thing as just ignoring the rules of grammar and punctuation. I've had several new authors bristle at my changes and tell me that grammar just flat out doesn't matter in urban fiction. It does. Regardless of how much slang or profanity that you use, you must still avoid run-on sentences. You need to avoid misplaced modifiers so people understand what you're talking about. And above all, you need to avoid writing sentences without both a subject and a verb. For works like plays and spoken word songs, I guess they're called, honestly, grammar doesn't matter because you, the artist, are verbally performing. Your performance dictates what the audience understands. However, as any author who has put out even one book can tell you, when you put something on the page, even though it makes perfect sense to you, you can't really control how your reader will internalize it. And once you've published it, you lose control of what it means because your reader is going to decide what it means. And the best way to keep your vision pure and make sure that your reader understands what you're trying to say and visualizes what you want them to visualize is by using correct sentence structure, by structuring your paragraphs exactly as they should be, by making sure that your grammar is spot on, at least in the narration. And this is especially true for punctuation. It matters so much, you guys. So those are my 5 big mistakes that new urban authors typically make, plus the bonus. I actually really enjoy doing these, particularly on the smaller niches, because a lot of times when you're getting your books via algorithm, like Amazon, for instance, you don't even know that some of these subgenres exist. And that's one great thing about being an editor is that I've been able to branch out into genres that I would have never known existed and I would have never thought to search for. There are some really great books by some really great authors that otherwise you wouldn't have even known existed if they hadn't come to you and asked you to edit their stuff. So if you have any genres that you enjoy and that you think that you'd like to hear my take on them, please let me know below. I would absolutely love to give you my thoughts on them. Or if I've never actually had a client of that genre, I would love to dive in and see what the genre involves. So that's all for today. I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks, and I will let you all know what my next topic is, probably via Facebook or my newsletter, because I haven't thought of it just yet since I'm batching videos and filming this early. So until next time, take care and write well.